माधवा कुंज बिहारी जय गोपीचन बल्लभा गिरिवरधारी जय गोपीचन बल्लभा गिरिवरधारी यशोदानंदन व्रज रंजन यशोदानंदन व्रज रंजन यमुना तीरा वनचारी यमुना तीरा वनचारी जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी जय गोपीचन बल्लभा गिरिवरधारी जय गोपीचन बल्लभा गिरिवरधारी यशोदानंदन व्रज रंजन यशोदानंदन व्रज रंजन तीरा वनचारी यमुना तीरा वनचारी जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम राम हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे जय प्रभुपदा जय प्रभुपदा शील प्रभुपदा जय प्रभुपदा जय प्रभुपदा शील प्रभुपदा जय विष्णुपाद परमहंस परिव्राजक सदस्य श्रीमद इस्माइल श्री भक्त ग्रंथ स्वामी प्रभुपाद की जय। इसको संस्थापक शील प्रभुपाद की जय। जय विष्णुपाद परमहंस परिव्राजक सदस्य श्रीमद भक्ति सिद्धांत सरस्वती गोस्वामी महाराज प्रभुपाद की जय। जय विष्णुपाद श्री किशोरदास महाराज की जय। जय विष्णुपाद सच्चिदानंद श्री भक्तिविनोद ठाकुर की जय। जय विष्णुपाद वैष्णव सद्गुणश्री जगन्नाथ दास बाबू महाराज की जय। जय श्री रूप सनातन भट्ट रघुनाथ जीव गोपाल भट्टदास गोस्वामी प्रभु की जय। नमाचार्य दास ठाकुर की जय। प्रेम से कोई कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवसादि गौर भक्तवृंद की जय। श्री श्री राधा कृष्ण गोपिनाथ श्याम कुंड राधा कुंड गिरि गोवर्धन की जय। श्री श्री गौरांगी बेंगलोरेश्वर भगवान की जय। श्री मायापुर धाम की जय। श्री वृंदावन धाम की जय। गंगा माई की जय। यमुना माई की जय। भक्ति देवी की जय। तुलसी देवी की जय। अनंत कोटि वैष्णव की जय। हरनाम संकीर्तन की जय। ग्रंथा श्रीमद् भागवतम की जय। इस्कॉन वर्तमान गुरुवंत की जय। समावित भक्तवृंद की जय। गौर प्रेमानंद देव हरि हरि बोल। All glories to the Assembly Lord. All glories to the Assembly Lord. All glories to the Assembly Lord. All glories to Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna. So welcome you all to this Saturday morning Srimad Bhagavatam. We'll be reading from second canto, the last half. I'll touch a little bit on text 13 and then thereafter we'll go on. ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितमेन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। श्रीचैतन्यमनुभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूपकदा मह्यं ददाति स्वपदान्तिकं। वन्देऽहं श्रीगुरो श्रीयुतपदकमलं श्रीगुरुन् वैष्णवांश्च श्रीरूपं साग्रजातं सगणरघुनाथान्वितं तं सजीवं साद्वैतं सावधूतं परिजनसहितं कृष्णचैतन्यदेवं श्रीराधाकृष्णपादान् सगणललिता श्रीविशाखान्वितांश्च हे कृष्ण करुणा सिंधु दीनबंधु जगतपते गोपेश गोपिका कांता राधा कांत नमोस्तुते तप्त कांचन गौरांगी राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपासिन्धुभ्यः एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवसादि गौर भक्तवृंद। हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे। ओहम करोति वाचालं पङ्गुं लङ्घयति गिरिं वन्दे श्रीगुरुं परमानन्दमाधवं श्री चैतन्यमीश्वरम्। So we see in the text number 13. So from here onward, we see that Srila Sukadeva Goswami is offering prayers to the Supreme Lord. So in verse number 13, he's mentioning that I again offer my respectful obeisances unto the form of complete existence and transcendence, who is the liberator of the pious devotees from all distresses and the destroyer of the further advances in the atheistic temperament of the non-devotee demons. For the transcendentalists who are situated in the topmost spiritual perfection, he grants their specific destinations. See the purport, we see that Srila Prabhupada mentions about how here the Lord is addressed as Akhila Murti. Akhila Murti means one who has a form of complete transcendence. Akhila means it is complete and or not Khila. That is, the Khila is an inferior and Akhila means complete. So Lord is a complete form of transcendental nature. So there are two types of nature which is mentioned in Bhagavad Gita. One is a material nature, which is apara, and the other one is transcendental, is para. So the Lord is a murti, that means he has got a form, and it is a transcendental form. Because he is complete in this transcendental existence or transcendental form, he is also kind to everyone, just as a father is kind to all his children. So the Lord is all merciful and he is kind to everyone. So some examples are given here as to how he delivers the pious devotees who are aware of this transcendental form and they want to render him service. So the Lord reciprocates with them accordingly, and he removes also the distresses of all these devotees. Now, it is not unusual because everyone goes through so many distresses, but the Lord gives freedom from these distresses for the pious devotees, and he also destroys the further advances in atheistic temperament of non-devotee demons. That means the non-devotee demons have an atheistic tendency. To them also the Lord is very merciful and he stops them from performing further nefarious activities or atheistic activities. For example, he killed Hiranyakashipu, Ravana, and Kamsa. He gave them liberation. So that way, even by punishing them, the Lord gave his mercy. And then also mention about how the transcendentalists or the Paramahamsas, to them also the Lord gives them their desired destinations, a specific destination he gives. So in the Paramahamsas, it is said there are two classes of devotees. One are the impersonalists who believe in the impersonal form of the Lord, and other one are the devotees. And but actually, as per Srimad Bhagavatam, these Paramahamsas mentioned here are the devotees who take up the path of Bhakti Yoga. But it does not mean that the Lord does not deliver the impersonalists. Those who believe in the impersonal form of the Lord gives them a path by which they can attain the impersonal Brahmajyoti. That is, those who want to enter this Brahman effulgence, He gives them a facility. But even the Brahman effulgence cannot be entered without having some understanding of the Lord. At least somebody must have, yes, He is the Supreme Lord. And this Brahma Jyoti is nothing but a glaring effulgence that is emanating from the Lord. So that much knowledge at least one must have about the Lord. So Lord facilitates them also. So in this verse, there's a mention of how Sri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakura mentions that there are two classes of devotees. One is the Premanandis and the other is the Brahmanandis. The Brahmanandis are the one who aspire after the Brahma Jyoti, and the Premanandis are the ones who want to have loving relationship with the Lord. To them also, the Lord gives them their respective destinations. So the example is given as to how the Lord mentions in Bhagavad Gita, E eta mam prapadyante. So as the translation goes, as all surrender unto me, I reward them accordingly. Everyone follows my path in all respects, O son of Buddha. So whatever path everyone accepts, the Lord rewards them accordingly. But one thing is that everyone looks after the superior power. That superior power is none other than the Lord Krishna himself, and who is manifest in different forms based on the desire of the respective devotees. So some uh, realize the Brahman feature of the Lord, that is the impersonal Brahmajyoti. Some have the realization for the Paramatma feature, that is the Lord is also seated in everyone's heart, in the four-handed form. So some try to aspire for those, and some try to realize the complete feature of the Lord, that is Bhagavan. Bhagavan is the complete, which also includes Brahman as well as Paramatma. So they worship Krishna. Those who worship Lord in the Bhagavan form of the Lord, they worship Krishna in many of the rasas like Shanta rasa, Dasya rasa, Sakya rasa, as a personal friend or as his son, as a lover. So in all these respects, the Lord reciprocates with the devotees according to their feelings. And they Lord also facilitate by giving them an opportunity to establish loving relationship with Him. So this Premanandi means ultimately the goal of life is to attain love for the Lord, which the Lord facilitates to His devotees who want to have a relationship with Him. In the next sloka, Sukadeva Goswami says, "Let me offer my respectful obeisance unto him who is associate of the members of the Yadu dynasty, and he is also uh, yeah, and is always a problem for the non-devotees. He's the supreme enjoyer for both the material and spiritual worlds, yet he enjoys his own abode in the spiritual sky, and there is no one equal to him because his transcendental opulence is immeasurable." So there are two sides of a transcendental manifestations. One is the pure devotees of the Lord who worship the personal form of the Lord. And for them, as I mentioned, the Lord becomes one of his associates. For example, friends like Sudama, Sridama, etc., and like the members of the Yadu dynasty. And for the impersonalists, the Lord expands to Brahma Jyoti, which is an effulgence coming from the spirit, covering the spiritual sky. To them also, the Lord facilitates by making them merge as one of the sparks in that effulgence. So when one enters this Brahma Jyoti, what happens is that it's like a small spark in a big effulgence. So one does not have an individual identification, or one does not have the opportunity to render service to the Lord, which is the constitutional position of every jiva. So, in the purport, Srila Prabhupada mentions as how this Brahma Jyoti is compared to the sun rays. Ultimately, the sun rays are originating from the sun. Similarly, the glaring effulgence of Brahma Jyoti covers the Supreme Lord for those who want to worship Him in that impersonal form, who think that the Lord does not have any form, but the Lord has got multiple forms. He can manifest all the forms at the same time also. So, for example, the Lord manifested the universal form to his mother Yashoda when he was in the lap of his mother. So, he exhibited the form of Lord Krishna as a child as also the universal form. So, this is the potency of the Lord. So, uh, just as the sun rays are coming concentrated on the sun disk, this Brahma Jyoti is concentrated on the Goloka Vrindavana, the topmost spiritual planet in the spiritual sky. And the innumerable spiritual planets in the spiritual sky called Vaikunthas, and they are far, far beyond, and they are far in bigger than what we see in this material world. Not only that, it's mentioned as to how the opulence in the spiritual world is immeasurable. We can't measure. The Lord is unlimited. His opulence is also unlimited. And the Lord resides in the spiritual planets by expanding his plenary portion along with his liberated devotee associates. Now, the impersonalists have no qualification for becoming associates of the Lord because their desire is not to serve, but become free from the distresses in the material world. So the Lord facilitates them accordingly. And all these Vaikuntha planets and the planets in the Goloka, including the one of Goloka Vrindavan, they are all self-illuminating. And these rays are scattered, and that is what constitutes this Brahma Jyoti. In these planets, there is no need of a sun, there is no need of moon, and there is no need for stars for illumination, nor is there any need for electricity. So, on the other hand, it is because these planets are self-illuminating that effulgence has been possible. So, also there is mention as to how the Lord is the supreme enjoyer of all these material and spiritual creations. So the Lord is Purusha, and he enjoys with his associates and with the living entities. So he is a supreme enjoyer, and there is no one who is greater than or even equal to him. And just as the Lord is unlimited, the Lord's opulence is also immeasurable. Text 15, Srila Sukadeva Goswami says, "Let me offer my respectful obeisances unto the all auspicious Lord Sri Krishna, about whom glorification, remembrances, audience, prayers, hearing, and worship can at once cleanse the effects of all the sins of the performer." Now, one thing is that we have all come to this material world, and once we have come to this material world, there is a tendency for us to commit sinful activities. So, when we commit sinful activities, we also have to take the reactions for these sinful activities. So, here Srila Sukadeva Goswami says that those who perform this, he mentions about 6 aspects of devotional service. That means glorification, kirtanam, that is glorification. Then he says Maranam, that is remembrances. Then Iksham means audience, having darshan of the Lord. Then Vandanam, that is offering prayers to the Lord. And Shravanam, that is hearing about the Lord. And Archanam, that is worshipping the Lord. All of these processes, by taking up one of these processes, or all of them, they can give the result of cleaning all the effects of the sins that one has performed. That means whatever sins we have committed in this birth, plus whatever uh, that tendencies we all have a sinful tendency. For example, we develop a taste to eat something. That tendency does not go away immediately. We might stop eating that for a day or for two, but that inclination to eat that particular this thing will always be there in us. But here, Sri Sukadev Goswami says, by taking up the process, either one of these processes or altogether, whatever way we do, we become free of all these reactions, sins that we have committed in so many births. So this is realized, but only if one does not commit sinful activities on the strength of performing devotion service to the Lord. That means we perform devotion service and then we become free from the sinful reactions. But it should not happen that we realize, oh, now I'm becoming free from the sinful reactions, so I can commit the sinful activities and continues to perform devotional service. That does not happen in devotional service. It is just like if one puts one leg in a boat and one boat, another leg in another boat, and tries to cross the ocean or a river, ultimately one will fall down. So that is how devotional service is. The only problem is that we don't have a realization that what happens when we glorify the Lord. The Lord Himself says that there is a quote in Padma Purana which says, Naham Tishtami Vaikunta Yoginam Hridayeshuva Tatra Tishtami Narda Yatra Gayanti Mad Bhaktaha. So he says, the translation is, O Narda, I'm not in Vaikunta, nor am I in the hearts of the yogis. I remain where my devotees glorify in my name, my form, qualities, and transcendental pastimes. The real literal meaning is that Lord is all pervading. He is there in Vaikunta also. But in specific, the Lord says, I'm not in Vaikunta or nor in the hearts of the yogis, but I am there where my devotees chant of the glories of my name, my form, qualities, and transcendental pastimes. So wherever the Lord's pastimes, His glories are chanted, the Lord is physically present there. But unfortunately, we don't realize that the Lord is present where His glories are chanted. The Lord is absolute, so He is non-different from His holy name. So when we chant the holy name of the Lord is physically present also. And one important point from here to 13, 3 verses, I mean, verse 15 to 17, Sukadev Goswami is specifically emphasizing with one sentence, that is, Tasmai Subhadra Shravase Namo Namaha. That means I offer my respectful obeisances again and again to that all auspicious Supreme Lord. So the Lord is very, very auspicious, and Sukadev Goswami offers his obeisances again and again. So he's emphasizing that by even offering obeisances, one becomes free from all the sinful reactions. For which, actually, to perform any of these activities also, the first process starts with hearing. Because if we want to glorify the Lord, we have to hear the glories of the Lord. If we have to remember the Lord, we have to hear about the glories of the Lord. If we have to have darshan of the Lord, then we must understand the importance of having darshan of the Lord. If we have to offer, if we have to worship archana or deity worship, we must understand the importance of deity worship to the Supreme Lord. So the first process actually starts with hearing. So hearing about the Lord is a constant process which one must continue. Then in the 16th verse, Sukadeva Goswami says, let me offer my respectful obeisances again and again unto the all auspicious Lord Sri Krishna, the highly intellectual, simply by surrendering unto his lotus feet, are relieved of all attachments to the present and future existences, and without difficulty progress towards spiritual existence. So that means here he says again, offering his obeisances again and again unto that auspicious Lord Shri Krishna. He says that highly intellectual, simply by surrendering into his lotus feet. See, many of us, we consider ourselves to be very, very intelligent. Now, we will come in the following verses. Srila Sukadeva Goswami is actually defining what is that intelligence. But here it is mentioned how by surrendering up to the lotus feet of the Lord, one becomes free from all types of attachment, present as well also for future. So if we relate to the previous verse also, sinful tendencies also become wiped out. So what happens is that we all have some attachment. This attachment is either on a selfish basis or on a extended basis. So sometimes we have our own selfish tendencies. Sometimes selfish tendencies might be extended to the either to the family, to the society, to the nation. So we all have some or other attachments. But when one surrenders unto the lotus feet of the Lord, then one becomes free of all these attachments, not only for the present, but also for the future. When we say for the future, because we generally have a tendency to plan a lot for our future, that I will uh, take up a very highly qualified course like management in IIM or an IIT, or I will go abroad for studies, or I will try to go and have a secure job outside of the country and make much more money. But what happens is that generally we tend to plan many things and plans don't work out also. That's why it is generally said man proposes, God disposes. But all these tendencies are there within us, and due to which we become attached. And what happens is that when we have some attachment, then we work for it, and that attachment becomes an impediment. So, taking shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord is such that it makes one freed from all the attachments that we have right now, and also the attachments for future existences also. That means if by performing devotional service or taking shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord, we will be able to become free from all these attachments even for future. One important point is that even sometimes, many times, devotees perform devotional service. They become attached to that particular type of service, so one should not become attached to that. Of course, it is good to have render a service based on our inclination, natural inclination. But sometimes it also happens that one might get other forms of services to render, but because they are attached to one form of service, they might refuse even the other type of service. For example, one might have a tendency to sing. It is good, but sometimes a situation might come that devotees might have a gathering, and all of a sudden something might come up that there is no one to cook. So at that time, if a devotee cannot say, no, I don't want to do this service. So that is like an attachment to one type of service. But exigencies can happen anytime. Devotee should be prepared at all point of time to render whatever service possible at, every possible way. Even if it comes to cleaning, one should take up this process, because cleaning the altar or cleaning the temple hall, they are all instruments in cleaning our heart. They become instrument, they facilitate in cleaning our heart. We have got a lot of anarthas which we have developed over many, many lifetimes. And these things are not very easy to go. But if one takes up even the menial service of cleaning the temple of the Lord, then one becomes free from a lot of anarthas. So here, Srila Prabhupada mentions about how one has to acquire knowledge for this. And this knowledge starts with understanding who am I, which is called self-realization. So this is what is called confidential knowledge. And then once one understands this process of self-realization, then one reaches this next step, that is God realization, which is much more of a confidential knowledge, which culminates ultimately understanding all this knowledge results into one developing a transcendental loving service to the Lord. And this is what is called a path of perfection of life. And this path of perfection of life is what is called Brahmagati. Or Brahmagati means to attain a spiritual form as that of the Lord. And when one attains the spiritual form like the Lord, then one lives eternally in the spiritual planets. I mentioned there are so many Vaikuntha planets. So when one attains the spiritual form, he lives with the Lord eternally, and he does not come to this material world to take birth and the cycle of birth and death. And this process can be attained by anyone who is situated in this human form of life very easily by taking up either of these or all of the six processes. But one should not be attracted to the fruitive activities or karma kanda or jnana kanda. There might, in the process, there might be so many attractions. Maya is very, very powerful. In the process of our performing devotional service, we might get so many attractions. By doing this, I may get better results. By doing this, I will go to heavenly planets. Or by doing this, I will enter Brahmajyoti. So many things can come, but one should not get attracted, but rather one should be firmly determined to take shelter of the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord. In verse number 17, Sukadeva Goswami says, let me offer my respectful obeisances unto the all auspicious Lord Sri Krishna again and again, because the great learned sages, the great performers of charity, the great workers of distinction, the great philosophers and mystics, the great chanters of the Vedic hymns, and the great followers of the Vedic principles cannot achieve any fruitful results without dedication of such qualities to the service of the Lord. So in the previous verse, there was mention about fruitive activities. And fruitive activity means we perform an activity with an expectation of results. And in this verse, there is a specific mention of how there are great sages who great sages were very, very learned. They may be great scholars. They can chant the mantras. They can recite anything from anywhere, from any scriptures. So they are all great learned sages. Then there is a second class of people who are performers of charity. Many think that I will perform this charity, I can get some results of the charity. People have a lot of money, so they may give charity to an orphan home or any of these things. So they are also doing some charity work. Then there are great workers of distinction who perform a lot of fruitive activities. Then there are a lot of great philosophers and mystics. There are many who are very, very scholarly, and some may be having some mystic power by performing some yoga or whatever it is. Then there are many who chant from Vedas, Vedic hymns and all, and the great followers of Vedic principles. So there are many who strictly follow many principles that are mentioned in the Vedas. By doing this, they achieve this. By doing that, they achieve that. But all these activities cannot give any result without dedication of such result to the service of the Lord. That means one may get some result, but if one becomes expected, perform these with the expectation of the result, then what happens is that they remain in this material world. But if the same thing, if they are dedicating the results of these activities to the service of the Lord, then they become free from resultant reactions. The point is that the conclusion from this point is, verse is that all the results, whatever we have performed in from these activities, they are performed for the satisfaction of the Lord. Actually, being a small, minute, and part and parcel of the Lord, our prime duty is to render service of the Lord to the Lord for the pleasure of the Lord. Just like a son. A son is supposed to perform his activities for the pleasure of his father. Similarly, we all have our natural tendencies is there to do something for our pleasure, but we are meant to satisfy the pleasure of the Lord. We are meant to keep the Lord happy. When we keep the Lord happy, then we also become happy in the process. So this is what is called God consciousness. Now, we all want to earn money. For example, one example is we want to earn money. That money, what is we are earning, of course, money is required for our sustenance also. We can't live without money. But one should not over endeavor to the extent that becomes, he tries to take money for that sense gratification, for his own sense gratification. So that is why it is Srila Prabhupada always mentions that body is properly to be maintained to realize one's relationship with God. All our effort should be to keep the body and soul together. Otherwise, it is like an animal life. Animal also have human life and animal life. There are four common things: eating, mating, depending, and sleeping. So the purpose of human life is been given to that so that we can achieve this God realization or the self realization, for which one has to emphasize on the process of hearing. Samsiddhir Haritoshanam. That means our supreme objective of life is to keep the Lord happy. If the Lord is happy by our activities, then that means we will also be happy. For which, again, hearing is the most auspicious activity. Now, in the next verse, the Srila Sukadeva Goswami says, Kirata, Huna, Andhra, Pulinda, Pulkasha, Abira, Shumba, Yavana, members of the Kasa races, and even others addicted to sinful acts can be purified by taking shelter of the devotees of the Lord due to his being the supreme power. I beg to offer my respectful obeisances unto him. So all these classes of men that are mentioned, for example, the Skiratas, Hunas, Andhras, Pulindas, Yavanas, so these are all lower classes of human species in the human species form of life. Now, how these lower classes come? Because in a marriage, for example, in a marriage, a Brahmana is supposed to marry a Brahmana man is supposed to marry a Brahmana woman. A Kshatriya man is supposed to marry a Kshatriya woman. But when there is a marriage between the other varnas or other these things, then what happens? The marriage is not perfect or not. The progeny that comes out of such marriages, they come into some of these classifications. So details are given how some are from the European countries, some are from the Western countries. So all these generations have come because of the marriage not being perfect. And as we see today, the tendency to commit sinful activities is much more in the Western countries and European countries than in India. Of course, we are very smart enough to follow these countries today. But if you see that the tendency to commit sin or addiction to sinful activities is more in the other countries. So, but even those who are in these classes of men in the human form of life, but if they take shelter of the devotees of the Lord, then one becomes free from all the sinful reactions. Why it is mentioned? Because devotees of the Lord, they are as good as the Lord himself. They are like the supreme power. When we say devotees, pure devotees of the Lord. So one takes shelter of the pure devotees of the Lord, they become free from all these sinful reactions. Now, these sinful reactions also have sinful impressions in us, which is called prarabdha karma. But when one takes shelter of the devotees of the Lord, they become free of even this prarabdha karma. That is the importance, is that when one connects himself to the devotees of the Lord, then one becomes free. Now, we see that devotional service has no border or no boundary. That means anyone from any caste, any community can take up the process of devotional service and become free from this. And at the same time, there is a facility also given by the Lord that one becomes Even from the most abominable species, lower classes, one can even reach the stage of a spiritual master also. That is the facility of devotion service given by the Lord. Examples are given that how Mrigari was a hunter, but he became a great devotee of the Lord with the association of Narad Muni. Narada Muni himself was a maid servant in his previous life, but he became a great devotee of the Lord by association with the Vedantis or spiritualists when he was a small boy. Similarly, Bhagai and Madai were all delivered by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So the point is that anyone from any caste or any community can become a great devotee of the Lord. He can also become a spiritual master also. But the point is that one should not consider the deity form of the Lord as an idol, nor one should consider an authorized spiritual master as an ordinary person. These are two important criteria. And the third one is one should not consider a pure Vaishnava to be coming from a particular caste. So there are three important points here that one should not, when we go to the temple, one should not think that the form of the Lord in the temple is an idol. Idol is a word that is generally used for demigods, but when we go to the temple to worship the deity, it is the Lord Himself who is present in that deity form. One should also not consider a spiritual master to be an ordinary man. Like uh, the opportunity to perform devotional service has been given by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, whereby anyone from anywhere can take up this process. One should not consider a spiritual master, oh, he's not a Brahmana, he's not an ordinary person, he's an bona fide representative of the Lord. Nor should one consider a pure Vaishnava to be belonging to a particular caste. So this is a reference from Padma Purana. So that means the point is that birth is not a criteria for taking in the process of devotional service. Anyone can take up. In fact, in the Chaitanya Chaitamrita, there is a very nice quote given by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Naham vipro na chanapati na vaishyo ne sudro naham bane chagrapati na vanasto yetirva kintu prodyan nikile parmanda purna apter Gopi Bhartapada Kamalayo Das Dasan Dasa. The translation is I'm not a Brahmana, I'm not a Kshatriya, I'm not a Vaishya or a Shudra, nor am I a Brahmachari, a householder, or a Vanaprastha or a sannyasi. I identify myself only as the servant of the servant of the servant of the lotus feet of Lord Shri Krishna, the maintainer of the gopis. He is an ocean of nectar and is the cause of universal transcendental bliss. He is always existing with brilliance. That means here Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, I'm not a Brahmana, I'm not a Kshatriya. We are all generally tend to identify ourselves as a Brahmana or a Kshatriya. Nor are we, or sometimes we identify ourselves as a Grihastha or a Vanaprastha or a sannyasi. But that is not our real identification. The real identification for us is a servant of the servant of the servant of the lotus feet of Lord Shri Krishna. That means we can't serve the Lord directly because we are not qualified for that. But we can consider ourselves. If we are performing devotional service, we should be considering ourselves to be very, very fortunate, and we should aspire to be a servant of the lotus feet of Lord Krishna. And who is that Lord Krishna? Is the maintainer of all the gopis. He is not only the maintainer of all the gopis, he is also the maintainer of all the living entities like us. And he is an ocean of nectar, and he is the cause of universal transcendental bliss, and he's always existing with brilliance. That means the Lord is the cause of, we all look for happiness, but there is something called bliss which one can attain by performing this devotional service. That is why it is called transcendental bliss, and the Lord is the cause for that. And Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself set a perfect example when he was here. He accepted Haridas Thakura. Haridas Thakura was born in a Mohammedan family, but he was given the title Namacharya. He was the Acharya of the holy name of the Lord. So Mahaprabhu accepted the position of Srila Haridas Thakura as a great devotee of the Lord. So this is how anyone from any caste or any community can take up the process of devotional service. So Sukadev Goswami invokes the blessings of the Lord who is all powerful. He mentions on the word Prabhu Vishnave Namaha. That means the Lord is all powerful. Then we come to text number 19. Here, he says that he is the super soul and the supreme lord of all self-realized souls. He is the personification of the Vedas, religious scriptures, and austerities. He is worshipped by Lord Brahma and Shiva and all those who are transcendental to all pretensions. Being so revered with awe and veneration, may that supreme absolute be pleased with me. Very important and very nice verse. That means here the Lord is the super soul. Lord is situated as the super soul Paramatma in the heart of all the living entities. And he is also the supreme Lord of all the self-realized souls. Many might have reached that stage of self-realization, but ultimate understanding is that he is the Lord of all the self-realized souls. He is also the personification of Vedas. There is no difference between the Lord and the Vedas. He is a personification of the Vedas. He is also the personification of all the religious scriptures and also the austerities. And such a Lord is worshipped by Lord Brahma, Lord Shiva, and all those who are transcendental to all pretensions. And being so revered with awe and veneration, may that Lord be pleased with me. So there are many paths of self-realization, but the Supreme Lord, who is the Lord of all the paths, He is the Lord of all the paths. The ultimate goal is the Supreme Lord Krishna only. But one can achieve this path or one can know this path only when one becomes free from all pretensions. These pretensions are duplicity, hypocrisy, all these are forms of pretensions. So if one becomes free from all these, then one can realize the Lord who is the important, who is the goal of all these paths. Now, the thing is that everyone has a tendency to love others, and everyone also has a tendency to be loved. And in the process, we want to attain peace. For that to attain that peace, all these parts are the various parts are available. And the problem is that we have an expectation of some result from all these activities. That generally these are classified as karmis, jnanis, yogis, or the devotees of the Lord. The karmis are the ones who aspire by performing fruitive activities of the Vedic rituals. They are called bhukti kamis. That means in the Vedas, there are many these things, injunctions that are given that by performing this sacrifice, one results this, gets attained this results. These type of devotees are called bhukti kamis. And then there are, why? Because they want to have some material enjoyment by performing these activities. Then there are jnanis, or who want to become one with the Supreme Lord. They try to attain knowledge by trying to get some knowledge. They want to become free from material existence. They are called mukti kamis. Then there are mystic yogis. They perform different types of austerities for attaining these 8 type of perfections. That is anima, lagima. They want to become lighter than the lightest or heavier than the heaviest. They want to perform magical feats. And they want to ultimately, they try to see the Lord in the Paramatma feature of the Lord. They are called Siddhikamis, or those who desire perfection of becoming finer than the finest, heavier than the heaviest, and all. So all these are all abilities of a powerful yogi. But the real devotees of the Lord, they don't have any expectation, they don't have aspire anything for self-satisfaction. They want only to serve the Lord only because the Lord is great. And being subordinate to this, to the Supreme Lord, the perfection can be achieved only when become desireless. That means we cannot be desireless, but our desire should be only to how to give pleasure to the Lord. Such persons or such devotees are called Nishkama devotees, or without any desire. A living entity by his constitutional position cannot be devoid of all desires like these Bhuktikamis, Muktikamis. But the Niskama devotees of the Lord, they don't desire anything even by performing devotional service. They are completely dependent on the orders of the Lord and are always ready to discharge their duty for the satisfaction of the Lord. So the point is that even those who perform devotional service with an expectation of result, initially in the process of devotional service, one may not be able to reach that stage, but devotional service can be achieved. Perfection of devotional service is achieved when one performs devotional service without any expectation from that. Why? Because when one comes to the understanding of perfect self-realization, he knows that whatever is there, it is ordained by the Lord for me, for my betterment. That means whatever situation we are put in, we must understand that the Lord has perfectly arranged it for our betterment. So the devotees normally depend completely on the Lord and are fully surrendered, and they are ready to discharge their duty purely for the satisfaction of the Lord. This is the ultimate process that one has to get, and devotees want to establish that relationship. Yeah, because we all have a relationship with the Lord, but we don't understand because we are covered. So devotees want to establish or revive that relationship with the Lord to please the Lord, whereby the Lord is satisfied. When the Lord is satisfied, then what happens is we also become satisfied. And one example that is given here is how Arjuna, initially he was reluctant to fight, but because initially it was his self-satisfaction, but later the Lord recited Bhagavad Gita, in which the Lord explains also about karma yoga, jnana yoga, hatha yoga. But finally, after Bhakti Yoga was explained, Arjuna took up that process, and Arjuna did not have any pretension. He changed his decision, and he satisfied the Lord by agreeing to fate. That means he wanted to fight for the Lord's satisfaction, and thus he became desireless. In the process of his becoming desireless, it is not that he lost anything. He became the Pandavas were all rulers of the world even thereafter, after the battle of Kurukshetra. The point is that generally we have a tendency to think, oh, when the moment when somebody starts going to the temple, all the other members of the or relatives, they start getting worried. Oh, he has started going, he will leave everything. No, the Lord does not deprive anyone of anything that is um, destined to him. The Lord gives fully, but the only thing what happens is that even when one gets the opulences, he understands that these are given to me by the Lord to be utilized in the service of the Lord. So everything belongs to the Lord. Is the supreme enjoyer, is the supreme proprietor, and everything has to be utilized in the service of the Lord. By which what happens is that the Lord becomes satisfied, and we also become satisfied. Here, the exam in this verse, the examples are given, like Lord Brahma, Lord Shiva, because the goddess of fortune, Lakshmi Devi, and the four Kumaras. Why these examples are given? Because they are leaders of the four Vaishnava Sampradayas, the four Sampradayas, of which they are all the leaders. And they are all freed from all these pretensions. Pretensions means duplicity. And these are unalloyed devotees of the Lord. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita, there is a very nice verse which says, Krishna Bhakti Nishkama, Bhakta Nishkama, Ateva Shanta, Bhukti Mukti Siddhi Kami, Sakale Ashanta. That means, translation is, those who are after fruitive activities for their pious activities, those who desire salvation, and those who identify with the Supreme, and those who desire material perfections of mystic power are all restless because they want something for themselves. That means those who have desire to enjoy something in this material world, they become restless because they want something for themselves. But the devotee is completely peaceful because he has no demand for himself and is always ready to serve the Lord. So, but you see, generally devotees are very, very peaceful because they don't have any aspiration. They don't struggle uh, like a common materialist because they have a perfect understanding. So those things, they don't have any desire, selfish desire. They are the most peaceful. The conclusion is that the Lord is for everyone because no one can achieve the result of his desires without his sanction. One must have an understanding that one cannot get the results of his activities also without the sanction of the Lord. Ultimately, the Lord has to sanction whatever one has to get. Lord is the original controller of everyone, whether the karmakandis or religious leaders, the performers of archery, he is the controller of everyone. But ultimately, one can realize the Lord only when one practices devotional service without any pretension. If you have any desire, that means we want to stay back in this material world. Then text number 20. He says, Sukadeva Goswami says, may Lord Sri Krishna, who is the worshipable Lord of all devotees, the protector and glory of all the kings like Andaka and Vrishni of the Yadu dynasty, the husband of all the goddess of fortune, the director of all sacrifices, and therefore the leader of all living entities, the controller of all intelligence, the proprietor of all planets, spiritual and material, and the supreme incarnation on the earth, or the supreme all in all, be merciful upon me. Very nice verse, very important. Here, Srila Sukadeva Goswami says, uh, the Lord is the supreme Lord, is a sum total of all the perfection. He is the worshipable Lord of all the categories. Who are the categories mentioned here? He is the glory of all the kings like the Vrishnis. The Lord is the protector of all the entire Yadu dynasty. Also, he is the husband of the goddess of fortune. Actually, Lord Brahma prays in Brahma Samhita, Chintamani Prakarasatma Sukalpa Vriksha Laksha Vrideshi Surabira Vipalayantam Lakshmi Sahasra Sadasambram Sevyamanam Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. The translation says, where Lord Brahma says, I worship the primeval Lord Govinda, the first progenitor who is tending the cows, yielding all desire in abodes built with spiritual gems, surrounded by millions of purpose trees, always served with great reverence and affection by hundreds of thousands of Lakshmis or Gopis. Normally, we have an understanding that Lakshmi means there is one. But here, from this verse, we understand that the Lord is served by thousands of Lakshmis. Lord does not have one goddess of fortune, but rather thousands. And all of them are worshipping the Lord, Supreme Lord Govinda. Who is that Govinda? Who is tending the cows. So this is the relation of Lord Shri Krishna, that he is served by thousands of gopis and Lakshmis, and how they serve with great reverence and affection. So this is an example as to how we can also serve the Lord in these forms, in these rasas. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was actually a strict sannyasi. He did not allow women to actually come near him or even bow down or offer respects. He never heard the prayers of Devadasis offered in the temples of Jagannath because the sannyasi is generally forbidden to be closer to the opposite sex. But even in that right position, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu worshipped, or he adored the worship of the gopis of Vrindavan as the topmost possible worship to the Supreme Lord, of which of all the gopis, Srimati Radharani is the topmost. Therefore, she is the counterpart of Lord, the supreme pleasure counterpart, and she is non-different from Lord Krishna. So, in the Vedic rituals, there are recommendations for performing different sacrifices. Such things give great, they give results, and many times one may pray to the Lakshmi Devi for getting some blessings from in terms of money. But all these, for all these, the Lord is the ultimate of all the sacrifices. He's the final enjoyer of everything. But the devotees of the Lord know that Krishna is the supreme enjoyer of the sacrifices or the performance sacrifices. So in this Kali Yuga, it is not possible to perform these sacrifices, and therefore Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has given the best and the easiest perform of sacrifices, that is the Sankirtana Yajna. Now, we are all conditioned souls. We cannot give up the practice of sacrifice, charity, or austerity. The point is that the aim of all sacrifice is to please Yajnapati, or the personality of Godhead. And therefore, the Lord is also called Prajapati. And according to Katha Upanishad, this one Lord is the Lord or the leader of the innumerable living entities. There are so many living entities we can't even imagine, and all of them are maintained by the Lord. Therefore, the Supreme Lord is called the Supreme Bhuta Brit, or the maintainer of all the living beings. Now, also, he is the Lord of all the intelligence. I discussed about the intelligence in the beginning of the class. He is the one who can endow this intelligence based on our activities. Everyone has got some intelligence. Sometimes we might say that, oh, he's very intelligent. Sometimes we might say that somebody is not intelligent, but he's the Lord of all the intelligence. He is the one who gives us, because behind the intelligence we have is the control of the Lord. Why? Because the Lord says in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 15, text 15, Sarvasya chaham hridi sannivishto mattasmriti jnanam apohanam cha vedeshcha sarver ahamev vedyo vedanta veda vidhe vachaham. The Lord says, I am seated in everyone's heart, and from me comes remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. And by all the Vedas, I am to be known. Indeed, I am the compiler of the Veda, and I am the knower of the Veda. So the Lord is situated as the Paramatma in everyone's heart, and from Him comes our power of remembrance, knowledge, or forgetfulness. Sometimes we might see, all of a sudden, we might forget something. The Lord is the cause of that forgetfulness. Sometimes suddenly we might remember something from the past, that also the Lord gives the intelligence. So one becomes highly intelligent by the grace of the Lord. And if one is a fool, that is also by the same control, that is the Lord Himself. Therefore, in this verse, the Lord is called Diyampati, or the Lord of all intelligence. So the point is that if we have got some intelligence in this life, we should not claim to be of our own. That intelligence is given by the Lord only. Therefore, He is the supreme proprietor, and therefore He is the supreme enjoyer also. And also there's a mention that the conditioned soul can enjoy a fragment under the control of the Lord, of the material creation under the Lord, but not self-sufficiently. That means whatever the Lord has given, we can enjoy a part of it as a pleasure for the Lord, but we cannot overindulge in any of these activities. One should be satisfied with things awarded by the Lord of the universe. So one should be self-satisfied with whatever one has been given by the Lord. It is only out of madness that one tries to encroach upon another shares of material possessions. So in this material world, what we see is that we try to exploit as much as possible. That is trying to encroach upon another's material possession. Why? Because it is out of our madness. So the Lord ultimately, by appears in this material world. He designs by His own energy to facilitate us by removing that covering that we are having, and He instructs everyone to surrender unto Him instead of claiming to be falsely enjoyers. So all these qualifications as different patis that are here are meant why, and Sukadev Goswami has specially mentioned the pati and gati. Pati is the husband and Gati is our goal. So the members of the Yadu dynasty knew that Krishna is everything, and all of them are intended to return to Lord Krishna after they. So the point is the Lord performed these pastimes so that we all the conditioned living entities also can understand our goal as well as our the path that we need to take. So there are so many paths that were explained, but for the Vrishnis or the Yadu dynasty, the Lord was the goal, and the process is devotional service. In text number 21. He says, it is the personality of Godhead, Shri Krishna, who gives liberation. By thinking of his lotus feet at every second, following in the footsteps of authorities, the devotee in trance can see the absolute truth. The learned mental speculators, however, think of him according to their whims. May that Lord be pleased with me. So it is the Lord who can give liberation. Just by thinking or meditating on the lotus feet at every second, following in the footsteps of the authorities, the devotees can see the absolute truth. I mean, we all struggle to see the form of the Lord, but once we take up or meditate on the lotus feet of the Lord, by following the procedures given by the authorities and by following the footsteps of the authorities, one can realize and see the absolute truth also. But those who speculate, who think, yeah, there are many who speculate who the Lord can be like this, the Lord can be like that. And here, Sukadeva Goswami says that by taking shelter of the devotees of the Lord, one can be free, and also he's praying that the Lord be pleased with him. So it takes for the mystic yogis actually a lot of time and efforts in many births to see even the super soul, which is not possible in this Kali Yuga because there in the Satya Yuga. But pure devotees actually, just by remembering the Lord's lotus feet, become established in trance, because that is the realization that is possible in this age, and one uses intelligence in the correct path and becomes cleansed of the desire for material enjoyment. In this purport sloka, actually Srila Prabhupada gives a very nice reference of King Kulashekara's prayers. I will not read the sloka because of lack of time, but the prayer says, where he says, King Kulashekara is a great devotee of the Lord. He says, my Lord Krishna, I pray that the span of my mind may immediately sink down to the stem of your lotus feet and be locked in the network. Otherwise, at the time of my final breath, when my throat is choked up with cough, how will it be possible to think of you? See, it's a very important sloka. It says, let that swan of my mind be attached to your lotus feet and locked in your network. We all want a network in the internet in so many things. But here he says that let my mind be attached to your lotus feet. Otherwise, how will, at the time of my final breath, when my throat will be choked up, how will it be possible to think of you? We don't realize that at the point of death, we may not be able to speak. We may not be able to think what we ultimate point is to think of Lord Krishna at the point of leaving our body. So, but here he says that how will uh, the path also, how will I think of you at the point of my death? So let my mind be always attached to your lotus feet. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, therefore, he asserts that the living entity is eternally the servitor of the Lord and that he is simultaneously one and different from the Lord. Further, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu reveals himself to the devotees when he is fully satisfied by the devotees' service attitude. That means the Lord reveals himself to the devotees when he is satisfied by the devotees' service attitude. Now here, Sukadeva Goswami is praying to the Lord for invoking the transcendental pleasure. That means there is a pleasure which one can attain by rendering devotional service, and Sukadeva Goswami is praying for to achieve that pleasure. Actually, the devotees actually consider themselves to be very, very fallen, which is mentioned in this purport. And so they always seek the Lord's mercy by meditating or focusing on the lotus feet of the Lord. They don't consider themselves to be great intelligent personalities. They follow the footsteps of the previous acharyas. And what can bring one to the process of devotional service? Only by having humility in them. So happiness can be achieved either by meditating on the lotus feet of the Lord or hearing about the glories of the Lord. So again, the focus comes to in each of these slokas. about meditating on the lotus feet of the Lord and also hearing about the glories of the Lord. In text number 22, Sukadeva Goswami says, may the Lord who in the beginning of creation simplified the potent knowledge of Brahma from within his heart and inspired him with full knowledge of creation and of his own self, and who appeared to be generated from the mouth of Brahma, be pleased. So the Lord is the super soul not only of us, but also he is the super soul of Brahma. And that Supreme Lord gave Brahma the complete required knowledge that was there to create. So a living being, we also have the knowledge that is required, but uh, in a minute quantity we have. But the Lord can give us that empowerment, and He can give that knowledge also. But because we are covered by Maya, that knowledge is also covered, and we are not able to assimilate that knowledge. So this potent knowledge can also be given by the Supreme Lord, which is called awakening of the knowledge. That means we are all asleep because of ignorance, but the Lord can wake us up by giving up this knowledge. And this awakening of knowledge is fully under the control of the Lord. And this awakening of knowledge is not automatic, nor it's a material interaction. The supplier source of the Lord himself is the Lord himself. That's why he's called Dyampati. Even Brahma was subjected to this regulation of the Supreme Creator. That means the Lord, in the process of reciting the Vedas, gave Lord Brahma also the process of creation. And that's how Brahma was able to create. And therefore, it is said that the words spoken by the Lord are vibrations of the transcendental sound. Some more points, but there is no time. So Sukadeva Goswami is concluding in this sloka that just as you inspired Brahma to create, you please inspire me to speak. That means we cannot speak anything of our own. We can only speak by the intelligence that is given by the Lord and by the mercy of the Lord. So just as Lord inspired Brahma to create, similarly Sukadeva Goswami is praying to the Lord uh, so that he can be empowered to speak. That means we can't speak anything about the Lord also without that mercy of the Lord. As the time is getting over, I'll conclude with the next two slokas. In the 23rd sloka, it says, may that Supreme Personality of Godhead who enlivens the materially created bodies of the elements by lying down within the universe, and who in his Purusha incarnation causes the living being to be subjected to 16 divisions of material modes which are his generator, be pleased to decorate my statements. That means all the material elements are created by the Lord. Nothing is there without the existence of the Lord. For example, sugar. We see sugar is sweet. If the Lord had not been present in the form of the super soul, then we would not have been able to taste the sweetness of sugar. So similarly, if we take salt, salt has got a character which is salty. Without the Lord's this thing, it wouldn't have been salty. So the point is that all these objects that we see, they have a spiritual touch which is given by the Lord. So an intelligent man or one who can understand that there is a supreme spirit beyond all these things. And that is how every element that is created by the Lord in this material world, they all have their animation by the presence of the Supreme Lord as the super soul. So that ability for that ingredient is given by the Supreme Lord, and the devotee therefore prays to the Supreme Lord to be empowered to speak. So here Sukadeva Goswami is offering prayer so that he may be empowered to speak to Parikshit Maharaj. Where Parikshit Maharaj asked these questions, Sukadeva Goswami offered all these prayers. And the last sloka, uh, Sukadeva Goswami says, I offer my respectful obeisance unto Srila Vasudeva, the incarnation of Vasudeva, who compiled the Vedic literatures. The pure devotees drink up the nectarian transcendent knowledge dropping from the lotus-like mouth of the Lord. So here, Sukadeva Goswami is ultimately offering his obeisances unto Srila Vyasadeva, who compiled all the Vedic scriptures. And the devotees are one who drink this transcendental knowledge coming from the lotus-like mouth of the Lord. In other words, Shukadeva Goswami is offering his obeisances to Vyasadeva because Vyasadeva is none other than an incarnation of Vasudeva, who it is this Vyasadeva who compiled all the Vedic literatures. And devotees actually drink this nectar of transcendental knowledge, which is emanating from Srila Vyasadeva. Also, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakura mentions how the gopis drink this nectar from Lord Krishna, which gets transferred into various fine arts of music, dance, dressing, decorations, and etc. So all these are enjoyed by the Lord. All these activities of the gopis, like dance, music, are enjoyed by the Lord because that is why the Lord is addressed in the very beginning as para or transcendental. So actually, time is short. With this, uh, just one point I would like to uh, mention in sloka number 25 that ultimately he says, "My dear king, Brahma, the firstborn, on being questioned by Narada, exactly appraised him on the subject as it was directly spoken by the Lord." So whatever uh, Brahma heard in the form of Vedas, Brahma gave it to Narada, Narada gave it in turn to Vyasadeva. So this is the way the transcendental knowledge comes through the disciplic succession. Therefore, Shukadeva Goswami prayed for the mercy of the Lord so that he may be able to repeat the same message that was spoken um, uh, by the Lord to Brahma. And this way, Shukadeva Goswami wants to speak to Parikshit Maharaj. So Shukadeva Goswami does not consider himself to be an intelligent person. Rather, he is seeking mercy of the Lord so that he can speak on the glories of this knowledge. Actually, the time was very short for the. With this, I conclude the class for the day. If any of you have got any questions, any comments, you can ask me for the next few minutes, 1 or 2 minutes. I can take 1 or 2 questions.